here's something new. Hillary Clinton apparently has a new title. It's not president. It's this: wandering folk hero. That's right. The rebranding is documented in a new Vanity Fair article. That magazine still exists, by the way. It's called How Hillary Clinton Went from Presidential Candidate to Wandering Folk Hero. The piece gushes and gushes and gushes over millennials' obsession with post-election feel-good pictures of Clinton doing everyday activities like hiking and grocery shopping, things she hasn't done in 30 years. They're all chronicled in a new Twitter account called HRC in the Wild. There's a lot of things you can say about Hillary. Folk hero? You could maybe say, I don't like Trump, I'm going to vote for Hillary, or I'd like to see a woman in office. But folk hero? You'd really have to work at Vanity Fair to believe that. Investigators now say the suspect in Monday's attack at Ohio State University acted alone when he plowed into a crowd and attacked people with a butcher's knife. The FBI says he was inspired by ISIS propaganda. The question is, how did he go from refugee to ISIS sympathizer in 2 years? Well, in August of this year, Abdul Razak Ali Artin was quoted in the Ohio State student newspaper complaining about Islamophobia. He said this: "I'm a Muslim. It's not what the media portrays me to be. If people looking at me, a Muslim praying, I don't know what they're going to think, what's going to happen." Well, some, like our next guest, NG Abdul Qadir from Georgetown University, argue this fear and alienation can lead to radicalization. Professor Abdul Qadir joins us now. Professor, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So you wrote a piece about this earlier this year, long before this attack, but basically arguing that Islamophobia, dislike or fear of Muslims, is one of the drivers of terrorism. And you said this: "What can we do about the tiny fraction of Muslims committing such unspeakable violence we saw in San Bernardino, Paris, and Brussels?" You don't address problems within the religion or the Islamic community. You turn it instead back on America and the West by saying our intolerance causes this. Am I misreading your point?
I think it's complicated, right? So I think at the outset we need to make clear that there's never a justification for a tragedy such as this one, right? So irrespective of the fact that someone may have suffered from bigotry or discrimination on account of their religious identity, that doesn't justify taking matters into your own hand and perpetrating or inflicting violence on professors and students or innocent civilians more generally. By the same token, I think with respect to the article that you're referencing, I was actually relying on research that came out of Stanford University that showed that essentially anti-Muslim bigotry and discrimination, or what we commonly refer to as Islamophobia, can contribute to a sense of what they term as cultural homelessness. This idea, particularly for newcomers, for immigrants to this country, where they don't necessarily feel that they identify with their home country where they originally came from, and they also feel alienated from their new host country.
Right.
So in this case, the United States of America.
But you can see why this looks a lot like victim blaming. So you've had an awful lot of Americans killed and injured by Islamic terror in the past 8 years. A lot, almost 100 killed, 350 or more injured. And you're basically saying that that happened because America is not hospitable enough to Muslims, and that seems unfair.
Absolutely not. First, I think we need to take a step back and understand that there's actually a greater threat of terrorism from white supremacist groups and right-wing extremists than there are from individuals who self-identify as Muslim.
Well, that's just not true. Actually, no, it's not. There haven't been 100 Americans killed in the last 8 years, 350 wounded from right-wing extremists in the United States. That's not true. And if you claim it is, I'd ask you to cite your source.
The FBI. So according to the FBI, the FBI data indicates that there have been more acts of terrorism committed by right-wing extremists and white supremacists. In addition to that, last year, Duke University...
In the last 8 years, there have been 100 or more than 100 people killed by white supremacists and more than 350 wounded by white supremacists in America. That's not true.
So I'm referring to the number of acts of domestic terrorism, as opposed to victims. So
look, I mean, obviously you're making a point that is unsupportable. I'm talking about actual acts of terrorism. People die, people get wounded. I mean, we can define terrorism many different ways. I'm just saying you've had an awful lot of people killed by Islamic extremists, and what I hear you saying is we're not going to take a moment to reflect upon why this is happening within our community, but instead we're going to look at the larger community and blame them. That's what I see happening.
That's unfortunate. First, it is important to understand that the data that I'm relying on comes from law enforcement, specifically the FBI, as well as elite academic institutions such as Duke University.
But what does it mean? I mean, okay, so let's say there are 10,000 right-wing extremist terrorist acts every day. It still doesn't answer the question, why are people coming to this country in the name of Islam killing Americans? And don't you think you should pause for a minute and reflect on what's gone wrong within your community?
I don't think anything has gone wrong in my community. First of all, there are about 3 to 7 million Muslim Americans in this country, and the individual who perpetrated this atrocity at this university is far from representative of that 3 to 7 million.
Well, I don't think he is either, and I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying I'm an Episcopalian, and if you saw 100 people murdered by Episcopalians in the name of the Archbishop of Canterbury in the last 8 years, a lot of us at church would be saying, "What the hell is this? What can we do to stop it?"
Right, and so let's take a moment to reflect upon that. When there are extremists that perpetrate a bombing at an abortion clinic in the name of Christianity, as Americans, we know enough about Christians and Christianity to sort of place a psychological space between that act that was committed by that individual and the rest of the population.
I'm sorry, I can't take that seriously. The scale is just not proportionate or comparable at all.
I would disagree with you. I think that the numbers say something different.
I actually wrote a whole book on crime. I know what the numbers are. It's not even close. It's not even close. Are you really telling me that there's no soul searching that you think Muslim Americans have to go through?
I think it's important to realize that Muslim Americans are your doctors, they're your teachers, they're your politicians, they're your nurses.
But a tiny percentage are also your terrorists. So why is this happening? It's not just the fault of white Americans. That's what you're saying.
So why is it that the conversation and a narrative focuses solely and exclusively on those individuals who are criminals, as opposed to the vast population who are peaceful and contributing positively to this?
Look, I get your defensiveness. I get that decent Muslim Americans feel under attack. They feel like they're being unfairly portrayed as terrorists. I understand all that. But at some point, you have to say, this really is a real problem, and it's discrediting all of us, and until we take it seriously, it's going to continue, no?
I think the community has been taking it seriously. I think that research actually shows that the community is very much involved in self-policing. They are very much involved in, cooperating with law enforcement officials and providing tips to them. In fact, the research shows that the majority of tips, that law enforcement officials receive about terrorist plots come from Muslim Americans.
Okay. I would suggest more soul. Something's going wrong, and I think it's important to be honest about it. We are out of time, unfortunately, but I appreciate your coming on. Thank you.
Fatality.
Society types.
That's totally right.
So I think this hurts the Clintons more than it does
I just have trouble believing, Charlie, that considering all the good works it does, ending childhood obesity, ending poverty, ending disease, insect infestations, all the good things that the Clinton Foundation does, that people won't continue to give it money. I mean, it saves lives.
Except that the Clintons are involved. No, I totally agree that the Clintons are finished, and Republicans should be.
The foundation is over too, right? Because it was only about access.
She's gonna be making speeches for like $20,000, and she's not gonna do it. I mean, all of the everything went out of the.
She's gonna be speaking to the Rotary at the Red Lobster on Route 29.
But the question about the Bushes, I think, is kind of.
Is there anything more infuriating than watching some entitled ahistorical loser burn the American flag? For many people, there isn't anything more infuriating than that, and that group would include President-elect Donald Trump, who apparently, after watching a segment this morning on Fox and Friends about flag burning, tweeted this, quote, "Nobody should be allowed to burn the American flag. If they do, there must be consequences, perhaps loss of citizenship or a year in jail." Well, while it's legally permitted to burn the flag, there are relatively few people who do it, and there are fewer still who encourage it. And yet there are some. Joining us now is Mark Perkel of flagburning.org.
Right.
Mark, I always try to take guests seriously. It's hard to take this seriously, but I want to ask you a straightforward first question, which is, why would you burn the American flag?
Well, one would burn the American flag in a situation where the government has gone so far awry that the only way to really protest it is to assert our rights as a citizen to go ahead and burn the flag and be that offensive, because what's happening in America is that offensive. And there are situations that justify burning the American flag, and we have the right to do so. And it's one of those things that you don't take lightly, and it's an important issue, but it's something that we as citizens need to be able to assert our rights, since our rights.
So you've said 3 times you have a right to do it, and no one's contesting that. The Supreme Court has ruled on that. But you've also got a right to scream obscenities at old ladies, and you don't because you're a decent person, one presumes. You're not a decent person if you burn the American flag, and here's why. Because it doesn't just represent the government. It represents the sacrifice, the deaths of many thousands of Americans who literally, not just a talking point, literally died for it. And you insult their memory when you do that. So why?
Right. So there's no constitutional requirement that a person has to be a decent person. The real issue here is that Donald Trump is announcing that he wants to take away our rights to burn the flag. And the thing is, the United States is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and that means the people are dominant over government. So as long as we can burn the flag, then we, the people, assert our dominance over the government. If the government can take away our right to burn the flag, then the government has dominance over the people, and that's not the way the United States was
Really?
made.
Because, I mean, I sort of buy a lot of what you're saying. I do think that we ought to resist government's encroachments into our lives. But, where were you when they started telling you how many gallons you can have in your toilet tank? Or when the Obama administration started spying on people's emails, breaking into your Gmail? I don't remember you jumping up and down. I don't think that you're a man of principle. I think you're a malcontent who enjoys infuriating decent people, is what I think.
Oh, well, hey, you haven't looked at my record, when Obama started the NSA. Well, when Obama started the NSA spying, there was somebody who got Nancy Pelosi booed at Netflix Nation, and that person was me. And that was an event that was worth burning the flag over. I didn't burn the flag that day, but if somebody had burned the flag over that, they would have been well justified to do so. The government has no business spying on the people of the United States.
Well, I'm with you there. But, Mark, look, when you look at the picture of the second flag raising at Iwo Jima, which is, it's an actual event that happened, and thousands of Marines died there, and many of them felt they were dying for that flag, or the raising of the flag over the smoking ruins at 9/11. Do you say to yourself, by desecrating this object, I'm committing symbolic violence against these people? And why would I do something like that? You're not attacking the government. You're attacking your fellow citizens.
No, not at all. The people in Iwo Jima didn't die, for the flag. They died for the right for people like me to burn the flag. They died for our freedom, and freedom means, the people in the United States, can assert, their dominance over government by burning the flag, and yes, it's despicable, and yes, there are despicable people who do that, but this country is a free country, and we have the right to be despicable.
Well, but again, you keep using the word the right. It doesn't mean that you ought to. Again, there are countless things you're allowed to do that you don't do, and by the way, if you want to assert your autonomy as a person, then why not say something interesting or compelling or make an argument that wins people over? You're not doing anything like that. You're doing something, in fact, very banal and ordinary and stupid, burning a flag.
Well, I'm not advocating that people burn the flag, especially right now. I'm actually advocating that people not burn the flag today because Trump wants us to burn the flag in order to create division, in order to create a distraction from the fact that, the Russians rigged the election in his favor, and that we have an incompetent president, and he doesn't want people focusing on the recount. So he brings up the flag burning issue, saying, well, I'm king, and by fiat, I'm going to take away your right to burn the flag in order to try to get people like me to come on and advocate burning the flag. And I'm advocating not burning the flag.
So, Mark, you keep referring to government for the people, by the people, which I think most people, certainly me, would agree with. If the majority of Americans wanted to ban flag burning, and I think probably most do, would you abide by it? I mean, that would be government by the people, for the people. The people's will would be done. So you would stop flag burning if we had a national referendum that banned it.
No, there's certain inalienable rights that are protected by the Constitution, that are so that the individual is protected from the majority. Because, yes, the majority would vote against burning the flag, because it's offensive. But the reason it's, the fact that it's offensive makes it such a sacred part of free speech, to be able to do something offensive is the ultimate, expression of freedom.
Right. That's a childish understanding of freedom, but I've heard it before. But I'm missing your argument here. Are you making an argument that the people rule? I thought that was your argument. And now you're saying a small group of discontents rule. You don't care what the majority thinks. You don't actually care what the majority thinks, the people think. You want to do what you want to do. Which argument are you making?
Well, it's inalienable rights. There are certain things that, are offensive, that our rights are protected, that the majority of people don't want. But because we have inalienable rights, the people have the right to free speech, even if they don't like to hear what people have to say. So, this is an act of free speech, the same way that the Second Amendment is it protects our rights, as the people, to make sure that that in case the government gets too far out of line, we can overthrow the government.
Right. No, I get that, but I don't want to dignify this, which is kind of a stupid argument with too many questions. But let me just ask you this last one. Where does that right derive from? Where do you get the right to burn the flag? I know the majority of justices said that, but it's not in the original documents. Does it come from God? Like, you have an inalienable right to burn the American flag. Where do you suppose that right comes from?
I think it comes from the Revolutionary War, that the people rose up and overthrow the King of England, that they pitched the tea into the harbor, and we rose up, and we formed our own nation on the basis of freedom, and that we created this experiment where The United States is a government of the people, not a government of kings. And Donald Trump is trying to turn it back into a kingdom where he can, by fiat, say, well, you lose your citizenship if you burn the flag. And he doesn't even understand, that that's not the way laws work in the United States.
What I find so remarkable is the government has more power over your life and my life now than it did 8 years ago by a lot. They're more intrusive. Right. They're making more decisions for me. There are more points during the day where they're telling me what to do at gunpoint, in effect. And you're not saying anything about it. And you're reducing the whole thing
I'm saying a lot about it. I'm saying a lot about it.
Actually, I spent all day on your website. You're just a garden variety liberal who doesn't like Trump because he's a fascist. The Russians stole the election. I mean, think deeply about what you're saying. You might arrive at some useful conclusions.
Well, if you read some of the stuff on my website, Obama's the second worst president ever, and Bush is the worst president ever. And I understand why people voted for Trump, because they were tired of the Democrats, they were tired of Republicans, so they wanted change. And Trump is change you can believe in. I'll guarantee you that things are going to change under Trump. I have no idea what they're going to change into, but there's going to be change happening. And it's probably pretty scary because the man has never held a real job working for somebody else in his life.
Heard this. We're out of time. Let me just end by saying, please don't burn the America. I mean, I can't control it, but please don't. It's really offensive to people who really did make real sacrifices. I get your point. We let you come on TV and talk for 5 minutes about it. Don't do that. It's awful. We're out of time.
I agree with you. Do not burn the American flag because Trump wants you to.
That's just stupid. Don't, because tens of thousands of elderly men who risk their lives for your freedom to do that are going to be hurt by it. So just don't do it. Don't be a pig.
Right.
Mark, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Okay. No, that's it. I'm going to end on that. Don't be a pig, Mark. Thanks.
Okay.
That's it. I'm going to end on that. Don't be a pig, Mark. Thanks.
Fatality.
I don't want to talk about it. You know why? Because I hit that big pig face right smack in the middle of the eyes.
I knew you were going
imagine the pain that I bring if I say it, I'ma do it in the streets of this thing. It's a K-I-N, G-N here, whilst band in the world, and I have no fear. I'm the mean and the mean.
All right, look, we appreciate you coming on. We know how busy you are.
I'm loving it. No, I don't get tired. It's lucky, right? High energy.